Donald Trump says he's done with Canada and that he wants to teach Canadians a lesson. And if you think that's just an empty threat, you'll want to hear what may come next. Trump also said Canada is the hardest country to deal with. Ontario Premier Doug Ford discovers that there are consequences for the things he's calling for. And Danielle Smith issued a strong warning to the rest of Canada that further retaliation by Carney could result in the loss of 500,000 jobs. This trade war is escalating, and if this continues, Canada could be about to pay a devastating price.
Bringing journalism and commentary 1 year anniversary.
I don't believe journalism being funded by the government is the solution.
You have to rebuild the foundation.
You have to retell the stories.
Market conservative
Other news that actually matters.
I hence wanted to ask. I think they should answer their questions, especially if they're politically charged with.
Hello, I'm Cantin-Nantel, and welcome back to the show. We are continuing to cover the Canada-US trade war that was launched last Friday when Mark Carney decided at the last minute to not sign a deal with the US. Now, Mark Carney has said that the deal was too unacceptable, but there's a lot going on here, and there's a lot more that could happen if we do not get this resolved very soon. And there's also a lot of consequences to the trade war. But before I get into that, be sure you are subscribed, like the video, hit the notification bell, and consider getting a paid channel membership for less than $5 a month, because we do not take a dime in subsidies from the Liberal government here. One of the biggest consequences that I fear will come out of this trade war is a permanent rupture in the Canada-US relationship, which is the most important bilateral relationship in the world. That's just a fact, and you don't have to like Donald Trump to recognize this. What is happening is the Canadians are increasingly frustrating the US administration, and this was pretty clearly illustrated in an interview that Donald Trump gave to conservative radio commentator Glenn Beck. Let's now have a look at that.
They charge tariffs. They take advantage of us as though they were a state. And they're not a state. And they've taken our car industry and they've taken our agriculture industry.
Yeah.
You know, the farmers can't sell anything in there because the tariffs are so enormous. And yet they want to sell in us without any tariffs. So I had a deal that was a pretty good deal, quite good. And because they're afraid that I won't do any business. In other words, we won't trade. They don't have anything that we have to have.
Canada has to make the case to the US that Canada is the best, most reliable trading partner for the things that the U.S. needs from other countries. Premiers that are suggesting that Donald Trump's a pedophile and tell Trump to kiss their ass, and also not taking the issue of China seriously, you're not sending that message. Canada is the only country that is continuing with this elbows up approach. All the other countries have decided they want to make deals, including Mexico. And Donald Trump believes that it's not time to teach Canadians a lesson. That is what he told Glenn Beck.
It's time to teach Canada you can't do this anymore. We lose $60 billion and really more than that, $60 billion a year with Canada.
Now, a lot of Canadians will not like such comments, and I can understand why. But it's important not to get emotional here and become rational. And the reality is that the U.S. is a far bigger, far more powerful country. And if they did want to teach us a lesson, they have the power to do so and no one can stop them. They're the bigger guy. That's just the reality of geopolitics if you take a realist approach to it. Canada should be trying to make a deal where there can be fair trade between the two countries, something the U.S. has signaled many times they're open to doing. And I've been in rooms with some of the most powerful people in that country, so I know what they're looking for. They're not looking for a trade war. They're looking to make a deal just like they made with all of the other countries in the world. That is simply a fact. And again, you don't have to like Donald Trump, don't have to like the US. But to think that getting into a trade war with the United States is good for Canada is simply not true. Donald Trump also said that Canada has become one of the worst countries to deal with amid this trade war. This all comes as Canada has chosen to retaliate and escalate this trade war, announcing a slate of tariffs on American products, which are essentially a tax on Canadian citizens. Canadians are about to be subjected to new 50% Liberal Party of Canada taxes that are also supported by some conservatives for some reason. Reading here from CBS News, the U.S. products that Canada will target with tariffs, and again, these are taxes on Canadian citizens by the Liberals, 25% on carpet and floor coverings, 25% on appliances, 50% tariffs on milk, cream, and cheese, 50% tariffs on perfumes and other cosmetics, 50% tariffs on toilet paper and facial tissue. So the Liberals are going to have a 50% tax on toilet paper and facial tissue, 50% tariffs on clothing, 50% tariffs on video game consoles, 50% tariffs on golf clubs and fishing rods, 50% tariffs on steel products, and 50% tariffs on aluminum products. All of this is going to make life more expensive for Canadians and is only going to anger the U.S. further. Counter tariffs do not work. As we showed the other day, University of Toronto professor Joseph Steinberg showed that counter tariffs, which are taxes on Canadian citizens, will do twice as much harm to the Canadian economy than the U.S. economy. What this is we're about to destroy our entire economy in order to stick it to Trump. Who in the heck thinks that's a good idea? In what world, in order to stand up to somebody, to a bully, which is what they say Donald Trump is, do you then go and destroy everything that you have? Hoo-hoo, look at us. Canada is not a serious country, and they're showing that they're not a serious country by putting in place measures that, while they are popular with the highly propagandized Canadian public that watches government-funded news all day long, and they'll be like, yes, let's go, elbows up. The reality is these measures are going to harm the Canadian economy and put us in a weaker position to negotiate a good deal with the United States.
So this is Lake Ontario in Canada and in the United States, but we're going to make a little change. We're going to call it something different than Lake Ontario. We're going to call it Lake America, and all it takes is a good pen and some intelligence. So Lake Ontario, that's gone. Lake America. So now we have a lake, and now we have a Gulf, because we have the Gulf of America, and now we have Lake America, without the of. Thank you very much, everybody. Enjoy Lake America.
Ontario Premier Doug Ford has been calling for Canada and Alberta to use energy as a leverage against the United States. But it seems like he just discovered that there's just one little problem with that, and that is that Canada relies on the United States for its own energy. Watch.
Right now, we're getting our fuel and our natural gas coming down to the U.S. and coming back up to Canada. Craziest thing I've ever heard in my life. And the natural gas coming from Pennsylvania coming up. Well, we already have an existing pipeline, so we're going to reroute that, and we won't have to be reliant on the U.S. Isn't that amazing that we have energy sovereignty once we build this pipeline? We won't have to rely on anyone in the entire world.
Who was in power for the last 10 years where there was no significant progress on pipelines? All right, the Liberal Party of Canada that Doug Ford is seemingly aligned with, whose supporters he said are welcomed in his political party, and who Canadians re-elected last year in order to stick it to Trump. Right. As you see here, significant parts of Canadian oil and natural gas travel through American pipelines before reaching Eastern Canadian markets. And Eastern Canada also imports substantial volumes of American crude, refined fuels, and natural gas. So you can see why starting an energy war on top of the existing trade war could spell for disaster. And that is exactly what Danielle Smith just warned about. I'm going to show you this clip. It's a little longer than the clips they usually show you, but you have to watch it in full because she sent a strong warning to the rest of Canada that there could be 500,000 jobs at stake here. Watch.
Although I understand the need to respond strongly to these tariffs, I cannot think of a more disastrous policy decision than cutting off or taxing Alberta's oil to the United States. Doing so would absolutely devastate the Canadian economy. It would not only extinguish the livelihoods of hundreds of thousands of Albertans, it would economically hobble our friends and neighbors in other provinces to the east. Let me explain why. And it's important that this be understood by every Canadian. If Canada were to put, let's say, a 50% export tariff on the 4 million barrels of oil that we export daily to the United States would immediately respond with a 50 to 100% export tariff on oil and natural gas that they export to Ontario, along with millions of barrels of diesel fuel and gasoline that Ontario and Quebec import from the Midwest. This would bring the economies of Ontario and Quebec to a grinding halt. Meanwhile, all those refineries in the United States that currently use Alberta's heavy oil would start looking to Venezuela for replacement heavy oil and reverse the pipelines northward to get it to Midwest refineries. As a result, we would lose the United States as a customer entirely and likely forever. This would result in the loss of about 500,000 jobs at a minimum, mostly in Alberta, but also hundreds of thousands of jobs in Ontario and Quebec. And if we cut off our oil entirely, what then? The same results, but even worse. The United States would, of course, respond and cut off all gasoline and diesel from their refineries to Ontario and Quebec, right as we turn into fall and winter. And unlike Canada, the United States has strategic oil reserves that Canada does not. So although their gasoline prices will increase, they will be able to keep them at relatively manageable prices, just as they have done through the Iran war. And without strategic oil reserves, Canada has no way to supply Ontario and Quebec with the oil, natural gas, and fuels that they would need in a timely fashion. The Toronto Stock Exchange would nosedive, along with millions of Canadians' investments, particularly our seniors, and small and medium and large energy companies across Canada would shutter and lay off their employees, unable to find a market for their product. There is a better way forward.
I don't know about you, but I sure am grateful for Danielle Smith's common sense here. I really am.
Oh, we're gonna trade war, marching on while the bagpipes roar. Oh, we're gonna trade war, beavers and moose won't take it anymore. Bring your tariffs, bring your fight, we'll answer back with all our might. Oh, we're gonna trade war, elbows up from shore to shore.
Yeah, liberal boomer slop is not what's going to get us a deal or out of this trade situation. And did you notice there was Tim Hortons coffee? I wonder, was that coffee made by Canadian citizens or was that coffee made by imported temporary foreign workers from third world countries? Elbows up, guys. Elbows up. The United States Trade Ambassador, Jameson Greer, gave an interview to Rosemary Barton. And here are some of the things that he said. Watch.
What will it take to get back to the table, Ambassador? Who makes the first move here in your mind?
Well, the Canadians, put out a press release saying they were suspending the talks. The Canadian side is proceeding with additional retaliation and a variety of things like that. So it's not clear to me on that front. I mean, the reality is we have a trade policy. It's global in nature. We're proceeding with it. If there's further retaliation from the Canadian side, we of course we're not going to just sit down and take that. Our view is don't retaliate. But I know that I know how people are feeling in Canada and what they think. So it's unfortunate, but it is what it is. And we have our own trade policy, and we'll proceed with it in the way that's best for the United States.
Jameson Greer also told Rosemary Barton the following.
Canada says the United States wanted a say in new trade deals that it would be pursuing, particularly that you wanted to review and even in certain instances dictate terms for future deals, which the Prime Minister viewed as sort of attack on Canada's sovereignty. Is that something you were asking for, and why did that make sense to you, Ambassador?
So no, it's not, and I think that characterization goes far beyond anything we've discussed. For a year and a half, we've had Canadian officials at federal, provincial levels coming to America and saying, we want to create Fortress North America, their term, not mine. And they've talked about this. And to us, what does that mean? It means that if we are going to lower our tariff barriers that we have in place for national security to protect sectors like steel, aluminum, cars, if we want to give better treatment like we were offering to Canada, the best treatment in the world, we expect other countries to also protect their borders. Canada has done a safeguard on steel. We think they need to do more to protect the North American market. Mexico itself, they've been raising tariffs on various Asian goods to protect the North American market. I would say in USMCA originally, there was actually a provision in there where Canada, Mexico, and America all agreed that if anyone ever joined a free trade agreement with a non-market economy country like China, that country could get kicked out of the deal. So there's kind of a long history of trying to defend North American market. And so it's bizarre to me to hear this suggestion that Fortress North America, you can say it, but when it gets down to brass tacks and you want to actually collectively protect this market and these critical sectors, that they're not going to do it.
Notice here how he talked about national security, which is something that I've heard a lot during my time in the United States. The US is in a new Cold War with Communist China, and meanwhile, Canada has allowed Communist China to set up police stations in Canada. Canada, for a while, hesitated to ban Communist China from our telecom networks. Canada has allowed Communist China to interfere in our elections. You got liberal MPs that go to Communist China. We're allowing cars from Communist China into the Canadian market to the opposition of the United States. If we're showing that we're not going to be aligned with the United States on one of its highest foreign policy priorities, we're not setting ourselves up for success. I actually support the Fortress North America. That is what we should be proposing. But when we talk about Fortress America and then go and do stuff with China, that does not send the right message to the Americans. That's just a fact. And let's remember what Mark Carney said when he visited China. Watch.
I believe the progress that we have made in the partnership sets us up well for the new world order.
Does that sound like someone who can be a reliable partner in a Fortress North America? I'll let you answer that question. This sums up today's show. I want to know what you think in the comments below. Be sure to also like, subscribe, hit the notification bell, consider making a donation, and I'll see you very soon. And until then, God bless.